Okay. We're live, gang. Welcome to yet another episode of Wick TV. It's a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. And gang, today have we a show for you. It's a simple question at the end of the day. Is there a best way to play Dungeons and Dragons? And is that way to play it as a war game? Harmony Ginger here says yes, but others disagree. And this has been a debate that I've seen go around the internet in different forums, time to time. Like, is there a best way to play? What is the best way to engage with Dungeons and Dragons? And I think there is, and I think this might be it. But we're gonna find out. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna discuss it. I got some lovely people here. Richard Witter should be joining us as soon as he gets his Discord issues fixed out. But I appreciate you guys for being here. I appreciate everyone for showing up. Zephyr Hash, thank you for the $2. Nerd fight. Indeed. And with that, let's give everyone here a brief, and I stress this, concise opening statements. Tell people who you are, why we should listen to you, and what your thoughts. Is there a best way to play D&D, and is that way to play as a war game? In pursuit of knowledge, I'm going to let you go first. Start us off. Go ahead.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Wick, for having me. This really was inspired by talking with you, and you tangentially just made an offhand comment saying that D&D is a war game. And that blew my mind because we all know, every person here knows that D&D is a role-playing game. And the best way to play D&D is as a role-playing game. If you ask anybody on the street, spit and hit somebody, they're going to, and you ask them the question, what is D&D? They will say it's a role-playing game. They would never say the word war game ever. And with that, I think it's very simple. And I have proof that my enemies agree with me with this. But we'll talk about that later. So that's keep it simple.
Okay, well, thanks for being here, and I guess we'll get into it as we go. Next up, we got Soy Pill. Soy Pill, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think if you go look at the original expansion to whatever the game was that D&D spawned off of, it is called a war game. But when I think war game, I think Warhammer. I think anything that's like a tabletop strategy, how do we fight each other game. D&D has war game elements. You fireball each other, you lightning bolt, you do your spells. But I always found that the most boring. The role-playing is the best part, in my opinion. Doing the voices, getting into character, and most D&D campaigns can be completed without any sort of conflict. That's why I think that D&D is best played as a role-playing game. But I'm also not a D&D expert, so I'm willing to have my mind changed.
Okay, well, thanks for being here, and we'll get into that, I am sure, as we go. I just had to send a link to Richard on Twitter to the Discord, but we'll get it done, okay? Jack, what are your thoughts? Well, thanks, by the way. First of all, it's Jack's birthday. If he won't tell you, I will, okay? So happy birthday to Jack. But go ahead, please.
For a gentleman who's going by the moniker Pursuit of Knowledge, perhaps I can find you some knowledge to pursue. D&D originally was a war game. That is historical fact, at the very least, although I don't tend to play it as such in the modern day. I am something of a neutral party, I suppose. I have no particular dog in the fight, but I suppose I can say that yes, Dungeons and Dragons began life as a war game through wargaming circles and has taken on the trappings of something other. I believe Mr. Kuntz, one of the founders of the hobby, has referred to this as the fourth category. It's something new, something that takes elements from lots of things that came before and creates something that was not there previously. But wargaming is definitely a strong root of the hobby, and I believe still has a massive part to play.
Okay, well, we will get into it. We will talk about it. We have one more guest who just joined us. Hello, can you hear us, Richard?
Yes.
Nice, excellent. The gang's all here. Oh, well, your video was on for a moment.
He died.
Yeah, sorry. I'm having a couple
no
of
dying.
issues.
That is a rule. I don't have many rules on my panel, but that is one. You are not allowed to die.
That's like the
on
Houses
that
of Parliament. You're not allowed to die in there.
But with that, we're talking, and the question today is Dungeons and Dragons best played as a war game? So tell people, Richard, can you tell people who you are, why we should listen to you, and what are your thoughts on this? Go ahead.
I am Richard Witters. I've been an art director and a concept artist on Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, and worked with Larry on Baldur's Gate 3 for a little bit too. And I'm into games. And you should listen to me because I have a cool dog.
Well, what are your thoughts? Is D&D a war game, and is it
I'm
best
sold.
played as such?
I don't think it's a war game, just definitionally. And I can throw in what I think of that. Best played. I tend to not kind of buy that anyway. That's like steak is the best food. And I think the way you play the game can vary depending on what you're in the mood for. Call of Cthulhu has very little combat, but it's a super fun game. So to me, that's a little more like best is a little weird. I could see making the case for it's a very combat focused game, so a lot of combat would make sense.
Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate you coming in. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but we got you here, and we're glad to have you. And last but certainly not least, Harmony Ginger. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Harmony Ginger at Ginger Blast on Twitter, Harmony_Ginger on YouTube, and Harmony Ginger on Substack. I think a lot of the issue here is a confusing definition of the term Dungeons and Dragons. It no longer has any clear meaning attached to it. OD&D and AD&D, both released in the 70s, very much had roots in wargaming, as can be demonstrated by the reliance on chainmail and by viewing early games like Blackmore, which arose out of the Braunstein or Brownstein, if you want to say it accurately, tradition. The game described in the game section of the AD&D PHB bears little resemblance to the conventional D&D played now, and what is described in the AD&D PHB is a game that has been all but lost to time. It's a game that gives players a deeper reason to manage resources carefully, plan, and vie for power. So modern D&D is more of a derivative of games like Tunnels and Trolls. And the key to unlocking this style of play has nothing to do with menial rules that people enjoy squabbling over, like ascending versus descending AC or whether tieflings should be playable, but rather by supporting wargame dynamics between players and patron-style play that you can support by having rules for mass combat and consistent timekeeping.
Okay. Well, I guess to sum it up, then, just as simple, is D&D best played as a war game, Harmony?
I would think so, but let me qualify that with I have no problem with anyone playing what is really conventional or standard Dungeons and Dragons now. Like, you play your game, you do what you want, but I think that if the term Dungeons and Dragons is to have a meaning aside from a fantasy role-playing game, then it would be good to ascribe the meaning of the game described in the original texts to it, because that is a very different game than stuff like Castles and Crusades or Tunnels and Trolls are, which is very much closer to the to what people are doing now, what people are playing now.
Okay, interesting. Well, so Soy Pill, I want to ask you, like, maybe to get discussion rolling, because you made a claim, and I wanna see what everyone else has to think about that. That the D&D is best played as when the focus is on getting into character, traditional role playing, if you will. Is that the best way to play D&D, and why? Why is that way better than playing it
like
as a
I
war
said,
game, as the other people would
so
say?
this is speaking from someone with like not much experience. I've probably done less than 10 campaigns in the 10 years I've known about D&D. But in my experience, when you're doing the actual combat, as fun as it can be, the power fantasy of being this magical, empowered, strong barbarian or wizard or whatever is kind of undermined by like any video game I've ever played. Like I've already had that power fantasy lived out in that. What's really fun is being able to be in that universe, embody a character, and interact with the DM in a way that's improvisational, lets you do funny voices, like really feel immersed in that world. Like otherwise, I'm just kind of looking at numbers on a screen and rolling dice, which is fun, but not nearly as fun as the being the character part. And that's why I think it's better played that way. But that's just my opinion.
Absolutely true, 100%. The reason why D&D is so popular because of today, or has just grown in astronomically. Number one, it was the pandemic, I think, and then number two was because people could get into character. Now, 1,000%. All these Comic Cons, all these different anime conventions and everything. You recognize something that people want to be in a character. They are cosplaying. They want to be a different person. They want to live out a fantasy. We don't play D&D because I rolled a 20 and you rolled a 18. Therefore, my combat roll is no, none of that. No, we are there because we have a wizard going in against a dragon, and you have a team, massing huge armies of orcs, and you're attacking. We're not there to just, roll numbers and do an Excel spreadsheet. It's crazy to think that's the now. If that's the only thing you're doing, then you're playing a whole nother game. It's not called D&D. And that's why, absolutely 100%, it's a role-playing game. As much as, I think the big reason why I have to say this is because everybody that's like on the fence to call it a war game, they're on the fence for a reason. Because they know in their deepest heart that they're wrong. That they know it's a role-playing game. Okay. That they can, Harmony, I appreciate all the historical fact stuff. I love history. I'm a huge, I read books too, okay? But it's important to recognize that today, D&D is not seen as a war game at all. It is a role-playing game, 1,000%.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It is open discussion. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. So first of all, I run a fairly large campaign with 16 players that meets with different groups all the time. I do run it as a more closer to the war game tradition. And I do want to clarify that people play characters and they do funny voices, and we have role play. There is a lot of that. And when I say it is a war game, I am not saying it is exclusively a war game, because D&D is like a mishmash of a lot of different systems. And I think that when people think war game, they think different than what the original games really were, which was, I mean, can I read the description of the game from the AD&D PHB? Just a paragraph, like not the full thing. It's like 2 pages. I don't want to bore you. All right, so it says, while initial adventuring usually takes place in an underworld dungeon setting, play gradually expands to encompass other such dungeons, towns and city activities, wilderness exploration, and journeys into other dimensions, planes, times, worlds, and so forth. Players will add characters to their initial adventurer as the milieu expands, so that each might actually have several characters, each involved in some separate and distinct adventure form, busily engaged in busily engaged in the game at the same moment of game time. This allows participation by many players in a game, which are substantially different from game to game, as dungeon, metropolitan, and outdoor settings are rotated from playing to playing. And perhaps a war between players will be going on, with battles actually fought out on a tabletop with miniature figures. One night, while on the next, characters of these two contending players are helping each other survive somewhere in the wilderness. And that's what this is. So my argument, I guess, isn't that you shouldn't role play or that role playing isn't an important part of the game. It is an important part of the game. I definitely believe that.
I think it's the most important part.
I used to agree with that, but I don't anymore, because I believe that the most important thing you can have for a long form campaign is Bronstein-like dynamics between your players. So what I mean by that is I mean multiple players interacting in conflict under a fog of war. And I think there are ways to support this, and the way I do it is I have players who run patrons. My players run the Pantheon, my players run gods, but to simplify, my players run patrons who are at war with each other at the same time as they run characters. And this is actually more in line with the game described here than the standard group of, 4 or 5 adventurers that are going on a Lord of the Rings type journey. And while I do think that there is merit to that game, I don't want to denigrate that game. I have had a lot of fun playing the game where adventurers are going to Mount Doom with a ring, or that story structure. And I don't mean to denigrate that. My argument is that if Dungeons and Dragons has a meaning, then we should look to the original text for that meaning, because not doing so is actually bad for other games, because the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, the way most people play it, is actually much closer to Tunnels and Trolls than it is OD&D or AD&D. And I think that there needs to be some historical context with that. And
why? It's a game. I mean, I understand the love of wanting to be in touch with a history of a thing that you spend so much time with. But to say that you need to be in touch with D&D as a historical context for it to be a war, and imply that wargaming is the whole point of it, I don't think. I think this is getting a little too far.
Let's I want to get some other people in here too, right? And I do want to give you a chance to respond, but $5 from Soyaddle, okay? D&D is best played as a dating game with your extended queer polycule network. Debate.
True.
That's the most Seattle comment I've ever heard.
$5. But I know Jack was raising his hands, wanting to get in there and stuff, so I want to give a chance to him, and I want to hear what other people think, because I guess the question that has come up, I think, is like, what is the point of Dungeons and Dragons, right? I think you guys are touching on this. Like, what are we trying to do? What separates Dungeons and Dragons from any other game? And that's an interesting question to me. But go ahead, Jack, you wanted to say some stuff. Go ahead.
I'm sensing some talking past one another on the part of Harmony and Pursuit here, but maybe I can actually use something Soy said to maybe bring the disparate sides together. And that is, I agree that role-playing is an incredibly important part of the game, but no one has actually taken the time to consider that the Dungeon Master isn't playing the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master is playing a character as well. That character is the world. You are playing not just the NPC behind the bar serving drinks, but you are the barmaid who is tripping over and flashing the patrons accidentally. You're the Dark Lord in his tower forging the ring, so to speak. You are the continents being formed millennia ago. You are the gods. You are the powers that keep the world turning. And the reason this is important is because when you consider that the Dungeon Master is playing the world, then you need to start simulating that world. Very easy example I can give for this, because I don't play in the way that Harmony does, although I do try and have elements of fantasy simulation within my game. I had a party of drow hunters going after my player characters as they attempted to approach a shrine of Elistray. These drow hunters had 2 custom monsters I'd made called drow stalkers. All they did was sneak and have rogue-like abilities with extra potent poison. They have advantage on stealth checks. They have a very high plus to their stealth. Both members of that drow hunting party, I rolled the stealth for. Do you want to know what happened? They both whiffed the roll. They had advantage. They both rolled below 10. All the players knew exactly where they were as soon as they entered the area they were hiding in. And it's that sort of simulation that you need to run in order to make sure that you're not cheating your players out of earned experiences. They have built their characters to have a certain statistic, in this case perception, which would allow them to spot these characters hiding badly.
So finish your point, but I just take issue with your foundational premise that the GMs run the world, or the world.
Well, what I mean is, if you
necessarily-
extrapolate that out, the dungeon master sets the pieces on the board, kind of like a deist deity, if you like. Well, that's what you do. You world build. It is the basis of the game. I mean, if you want to,
players are the ones that make the
why
decisions.
is the DM the only person involved in the world building?
Not necessarily. I mean, Harmony runs it in a way that her players play the Pantheon and do other such things.
So
but the
it
basic
would be
mode
more
of play,
correct, perhaps, to say that the dungeon master is one player of the world, but that the players, at least her
well,
argument,
they
she can make
inhabit
her
the
own
world.
argument for her, right? Like I
they
don't mean to talk
they
over you,
inhabit
right?
the world.
But,
But let's. I think you could possibly agree with me. The basic mode of play that most people experience is the GM is basically the mechanic force behind everything that is non-player, which is why we make the distinction between player character and non-player character. Which is why we say, the player can go through and under a fog of war, and this is where you would make it into a war game, create a nation for themselves at higher levels in advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So you're actually sort of siding with Harmony quite hard there, as you've sort of come in at me, which is quite interesting. What I'm trying to say is,
he agrees with that. He thinks it is a war game. That's what.
is.
That's yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So what
it's
I'm
not,
trying,
but it's
what
okay.
I'm attempting to say is that the world is simulation. And to answer your other question, Pursuit, as to why does being in touch with historicity on this sort of point matter? It matters because if you want good games, if you want things that are substantially good and not just a meme for a Saturday night, if you want something that will truly touch someone's soul, then you're better off going with older sources, because those things reference older things still. More modern things tend to reference newer things, and to coin something of a phrase, D&D has become something of a self-referential circle, like pissing in one's own mouth. It just gets worse each time you taste it. I would definitely recommend getting in touch with the history of the game, because it does actually produce very edifying games.
I'm not surprised a British guy from the old world of Europe believes that we need to stay in touch with their roots. I understand. But here in America, we believe in new things, okay? We do love creating new standards, okay? No, I'm playing
God.
I do want to touch on that though, because I'm curious. I know we're not supposed to talk politics in this panel, but this almost seems like a constitutionalist argument where it's like, well, this was
Absolutely.
history.
No.
We should kind
That's
of
what I
follow it.
hear.
Like, I'm not saying there aren't good parts. I'm sure like you could pick and choose. I don't know. I know there's different editions, and it's like, okay, this one has better ones. This one has better.
It's more of an Appendix N argument.
Gotcha. But what I'm
let's-
asking is like, what's to say the older version is better or worse?
I'm not
than
saying the
newer
older version is
You literally just
better
said
or
that.
not.
That
No,
we
I'm
should be more
saying
in
getting
tune because
you
it's
should
better.
be more in tune with the historicity of things, because you find better mechanics from it, such as simulating the world does provide a more edifying experience. You don't have to take my word for it; you can try it. But
this is an ignorance question. Is that simulating the world more prevalent in the previous editions than it is in the newer ones?
I believe so.
I've done away with that. Oh, okay, gotcha.
I very much believe so. I mean, it can be done in most any game, I believe, to varying degrees of success. But when I say going and looking at the historicity of things, if you look at the newer versions of Dungeons and Dragons, and we've already had one commenter make a joke about such and such sexuality, polycule, or other such thing, that sort of thing is a result, I think, of stagnation. Whereas if you look at the rich breeding of the hobby of the fantasy genre as a whole, which is more my sort of thing, you go back and you look at Appendix N and you look at what inspired all the fantasy novels of today, then you see underneath it the mythology of the world itself, and you realize this is actually a very deep human expression of wanting to be better than we are. As you say,
a role-playing
we would go
game.
to these-
Yes, I agree.
But I'm not disagreeing. You see, I am not in the war game camp nor the role-playing camp. This is a fourth category, and I'm quoting a work that I still need to read by Robert Kuntz there, one of the people that were at the beginning. Like, this is a completely new thing. It takes things from both wargaming and from role-playing and from board games and all the other things. It is a completely new thing. It's only been around 40 or 50 years.
I do want to hear some other people's opinions here and get some other people. And Richard, I'm curious where you're standing on this. Haven't heard from you in a while. What do you think?
Well, I was curious if I got Harmony right. She has some players that are sort of playing gods or patrons, and they have characters, or they have, I guess, player characters under them. Do those players conflict with each other? Is it player versus player?
Sometimes.
Okay. Yeah.
It works well because the focus of the game is not on the characters, it is on the world. So most players have 2 or more characters that they work with. I have 2 characters who are engaged in some sort of spy versus spy assassination duel that's been going on for like 3 weeks now, where they're each kind of chasing each other down, trying to be the first to assassinate the other. And when players have buy-in into the world, like when they're playing patrons, when they have a way to seriously affect the world that goes beyond their player character, then you can have PvP, because if they die, well, they have other characters, and that's not their main buy-in into the world. So
I've found PvP happens with or without playing like you. I mean, I've killed a character recently. I've just had players kill each other in the last little session. It's all that hard work to build up one character, and the party fucking turns around and murders him.
But you're evil, and I drew you as evil earlier.
True, I am indeed evil.
I do believe that.
Great honor, by the way.
In a conventional game, as most people play, PvP does not work, and I wouldn't do it in those games. But when players are playing patrons and have a connection to the world that goes beyond their player character, then it does work much better. Certainly.
I've always seen it as like a lot of things I think we're talking about. Like, let's say you had an engine. You have cogs, gears, levers, pistons, this, that. And people would be like, the best part of engineering is the cogs, or the best part of engineering is the pistons, or something like that. But I often hear, like, I think what you're talking about sounds neat. I've tried games like that before, where you have multiple characters, or what I would call like a clutch. Like each player has a little clutch of characters that they can kind of play, and they kind of form a guild, or they can get sub-guilds. And that's a really interesting form of play. I don't think that in any way excludes or diminishes how much role playing you can put into it.
No, of course
and
not.
And the game sort of heavily supports combat. As you go back into editions, it supports resource management, tracking of resources, tracking of time. And in more recent, they've lost some of that. But I think in general, there's not usually a lot of role-playing mechanics, actually. So a lot of the role-playing reminds me of when I was a kid. I would play. We had this little submarine game, and it was just a Nintendo game. You go underwater and shoot fish and avoid fish and do this stuff. But I made a whole story around that. But it didn't give me role-playing tools. I was just playing a Nintendo game. So yeah, I would say the role-playing part is the part you bring to it. The only parts, or the main parts in the game, are combat, and in older editions, much more resource management.
I think that's a great point. Did you want to respond, Harmony?
Yes,
Go ahead,
actually,
please.
I have a few things I want to respond to.
please.
Wilderness survival was much bigger in older editions, which is a thing carried over from wargaming mostly. Hex crawls and wilderness survivals are wargaming mechanics. But I think A question I was asked was why does this matter? And I do want to respond to that. I think it matters because there is a game described in the AD&D PHB, an old game that has been lost. It was big in the 70s and 80s with campaigns like Blackmore. The Blackmore campaign is fascinating to read about, by the way. And these were the rules they followed. And that campaign doesn't exist anymore. Nobody's running games like this. People are running something completely different. And again, I bear no ill will to Dungeons and Dragons as it is played conventionally, as you guys probably play at your tables. I'm just saying that that is a different game than than games like Blackmore or Midgard or with Bronstein Dynamics. Those are completely different games. And I think if Dungeons and Dragons is to have meaning, I would like to see it. I would like to see this game come back, is what I'm saying, because it is a good game. It's one that, like, I played Dungeons and Dragons, like, I started with 3rd edition and went 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition. I played it for a very long time, and I played through all sorts of modules, DM homebrew, I ran my own homebrew, I ran modules, and it was a good game and I had fun with it. But when I started playing like the old style game that is just not really in any of the new materials, I was fascinated to find that there was a completely different game there. And like I said, let me reiterate one more time. I have nothing against the game that people play now. I just think it is closer to Tunnels and Trolls or Castles and Crusades. And there are different games that really support that better than Dungeons and Dragons does.
Yeah. Just real quick, I have something against those types of games. I'll raise my hand, right? I think that there are better games and better ways to play, and there are worse ways to play, right? And I think that too often we fall into this trap of, oh, every single way is good. As long as your players are having fun, it's a good game and you should continue. No, there are ways that your party can have more fun, right? There are ways that you
Role-playing,
can improve,
correct. I agree.
right? Role-playing, let's talk about that.
No one's saying don't roleplay.
I understand that, but
right? To explain, let me go. You can have a war game with role-playing. Any game, literally any game out there, you can add role-playing into. In fact, I would posit that the role-playing in and of itself doesn't really need rules. What needs rules, what the game system needs to provide you, is a way to resolve conflicts and to measure successes and failures and the results therein. And so the best way to play a Dungeons and Dragons game is simply to view it and play it and run it as a war game. And if you do this, your game, no matter how much role play you want or don't want, will improve. It will be a more enjoyable experience. It will be more involved. It will get more buy-in from the players. You will have more interesting encounters. All of these, everything will improve. But go ahead, Harmony, please.
Yes, the why here. Why does it get more buy-in from the players? Because it is interesting when you're competing with other players. When there are like several players in the world, some of which you may never even play face-to-face with, or you may never even interact with, who are competing for the same stuff, that is a drive. That is motivation right there. Like, and it's hard to...
But that's role-playing. What you just described is role-playing. Because what Wick is describing is talking about rolling dice to determine, who won the battle. And then what we do is we just add role-playing, we can add role-playing to chess. You were just talking about how every game can be a role-playing game. Okay, I can have chess as my war game, and we determine whoever wins with combat by, did my knight take your rook? But what you're describing, Harmony, right now is role-playing. What I'm arguing, that 100% D&D in every way is a role-playing game first. And talking about what Richard said earlier about how engines have different parts, and then, oh, you need this and that. I completely agree. But we can have an engine without certain parts as well. And I think that you can make engines without pistons, right? We don't have to have pistons. You can have rotary motors, right? So what I'm saying is this word games of trying to mass definitions so we can fit certain things. I think it's a lot about is the focus, which I understand. You want to feel good about the fact that you know the history of a hobby that is very near and dear to your heart. Completely agree. At the same time, I don't think you're quite grasping the fact that it is a role-playing game first. And that's what I'm arguing against Wick so much with his gatekeeping, is that it's a war game and that we have to have battle systems. Therefore, if we don't have battle systems, any game can be a role-playing game. That's wild to me. That's a crazy statement. I don't know. I'm sorry.
So when you sit down to say you're a player character and you're role-playing, what is the objective that you go into? If it's
to have fun and be with my friends.
Just role-playing, no. So if we're looking from an actor's point of view, to act as this character. Let's say you're Morgan Ironwolf. What is your motivation?
I make it up, right? What do you mean?
No, so just make one now. Like you're Morgan Ironwolf.
I'm Morgan Ironwood. I want to kill all redheads because for whatever reason, arbitrary. I don't know why.
Morgan Ironwolf was a redhead.
Morgan Ironwolf is a redhead.
Yeah, she is a redhead. This is why you need to know the history of the Hobbit.
That's why it's such an interesting fact that I want to be the only one left.
So
Hello?
You want to be the only gay in the village. All right. So you are Morgan Ironwolf.
Is that not interesting?
You want to go and kill another redhead. Right. So another player character makes a redhead. Let's say Harmony Ginger comes in, she does a self-insert, there's another redhead. Oh dear. Now your role play is a war game.
It's a war game.
It's war,
it's
right?
an element
conflict
of
happening.
It.
Yes,
there's a conflict.
Yes, there is conflict, which is what I'm trying to say is this fourth category has happened, where role-playing, wargaming has come together and made something entirely new, which is what Harmony's trying to explain. It's like the conflict is good role-play opportunity.
Is Australia an island or a continent?
Can I contribute a really uninformed D&D opinion right now? And that is
it's surrounded by water.
Wait,
all right, go ahead.
And so I agree. Obviously, I mean, if you learn this in acting and improv, that like any scene without conflict is probably going to be incredibly boring. You have to have some sort of conflict. But this is my uninformed. I've never like distinguished between like additions or anything in D&D. The worst part about D&D for me, whenever I played it, was when we get into a battle and it's like, okay, you're fighting 25 trolls or whatever, and you got to roll initiative for each one of these. Each one of them has to take their turn. You got to figure out, okay, what's their stats? Do their things that maybe not. But even in Baldur's Gate 3, which was mentioned before, which I really really enjoyed, the best part of that was. Sure, maybe. The best part was that it was even in those combats with like way too many people, which was really annoying. Everything happened at the exact same speed, which is the speed of the game. I don't have to wait for the DM to catch up and do all these things. But that was always for me the bottleneck of my enjoyment was how fast we can make this combat happen so I can get back into the conflict. And what that situation that you just described was where two gingers are fighting to be like, the Highlander ginger.
That can only be one.
The interesting part is not, who has better stats and is going to win in this conflict. The interesting part is, why do these people want this, and how are they going to resolve it, and how are they going to yell their dumb one-liners at each other as they are trying to become the supreme, right? Like that's the interesting part to me. So this is, again, my uninformed opinion. If you removed all combat and just like immediately just resolved it at the click of a button and just said, hey, this is what happened, I would find that much more interesting because I want to get into the nitty-gritty of the players and characters. If there's a better game for that, sure. But this is what I'm saying with like, is D&D better played as a war game?
So this is Harmony's point. It's like we're playing a different game.
I want to get first of all $10 from Ultra American TTRPG. Gatekeeping is good. Period. We need to purge trolls from the hobby and make tabletop great again. Play and run your game how you want, but don't tell me how to play and run mine. Thank you for the $10, but frankly, I believe my way is the best way, and I will evangelize. I will preach it, and I won't apologize for it. But Richard, please go ahead.
Okay, I think I can maybe make a bridge between what a lot of people are talking about.
Please do.
except for you, Wick, who I think's wrong.
It's okay to think that. I am right regardless. But go ahead.
Headshot.
Et tu, Brutus?
Okay, so D&D, as most people would agree, is like the Kleenex of the tissue industry. When people think of tabletop games, they say D&D. If they're playing Pathfinder, they say D&D. Playing Cthulhu, they say let's play D&D. Right? So it's kind of overtaken it. But as Harmony was saying, the style that people play now, which is single character party, this, that kind of thing, has been the dominant mode of play in tabletop games for a long time. Now, what I don't see if now tabletop is a platform. Let's say it's a platform like computer games. Now, what I don't see in computer games is people going, a real-time strategy is superior to a first-person shooter, which is superior to a game like Farmville. Right? They're different styles of play. And when you're in the mood for one, you play one. When you're in the mood for another, you play another. Right? And like I said, Cthulhu is much more about role-playing this fear and mystery. It's if you get into combat, you're likely going to die. It's more about you going insane. What Harmony is describing is another mode of play. The standard D&D game is like sort of a fixed mode of play. Some people add more role playing, some people add less. Some do pure dungeon crawls, some do hack and slash games. These are all just modes of play. And personally, it's been 35 years I've been doing tabletop games. I've really loved some, and then I get bored of that, and then I try something new. That's fun now. Then I go back to the thing I did before. Let's try another one of those. Let's play another meat grinder, right? So to me, that variety, if it's cutting down on that variety, I think you're hemming in what you can do with tabletop games, and
I
you're
don't
even
disagree
hemming
with
out.
that. I don't disagree with that at all. Yeah,
you're even hemming out.
Let him finish, and then we're gonna get more people in. But yeah, finish up, Richard.
Yeah, you're simultaneously, people will hem out what Harmony's trying to explore by reinvigorating this other style of play, but then other people will push out people who I like role-playing more. To me, it's just, as long as you're up front with, this is the mode we're playing, and people are interested in it, you're good.
You want to respond to any of that, Rich? Harmony?
Yes.
Okay.
A couple things. This is actually a hard one to say here. I'm not arguing for another mode of play. I am arguing that the original text describes this mode of play. This isn't West Marches. This isn't a new mode of play here. This is the original game that is described in the texts. Now, that has evolved. Yes, we like new things too. New things are different than old things, but I'm not saying that this is another mode of play. I'm saying that this is the game described in the old Dungeons and Dragons books. And I had a point before I was interrupted and told I was just happy to know the history. I do think knowing history is important, though. But
it sounds like you're saying both, because like I was talking about with the Pong was the original intent for video game. Right, and it is a mode of game. And then over the years, you had subsets of games come out: first-person shooters, strategy, real-time strategy.
But we don't call all those games Pong.
Nope, exactly. That's what I was saying. The Kleenex issue is an issue because tabletop is a better term. Yeah.
So, pursuit of happiness. What's your name? Pursuit of knowledge. There we go. Pursuit of knowledge had a point I wanted to respond to here. You can say everything's a role-playing game, yes. And I role-play in my games. I like role-playing games. However, what I'm saying, what makes it a war game and why the PvP is important is the threat of PvP. We have to define war game. That's right. I want to go back and define war game, actually, because people in the chat were talking about defining war game, and I think that's important before I get into this. Okay, so there are a bunch of definitions of war game. I kind of looked up a bunch, but I think we all basically agreed before the stream on Richard Whitters defined it very well. We We define it as a game with player versus player. Each player generally commands a force. There is a referee or a game master to settle disputes normally, and you can actually see this in old editions of D&D. The game master is called a referee because it evolved out of the war game tradition. But why PvP is important for this is because it gives players a motivation that just straight PvE does not. Like, players are way more into the game. If they realize that anybody can loot this tomb and there are like 3 or 4 groups here, yeah, they're going to want to be the first to do that. But also, they want the gold, they want the loot to enrich their armies, to enrich their civilizations so that they will be the most powerful. They are in pursuit of power in the game. And when that is contested by other players, then it's big. Because like if you're with a group playing traditional like 5e module, you're not competing against the other players. You're competing with the DM, and you're probably going to win that. Like you might die, but you're probably going to win that. So you're not thinking about like things you can do to make your push for victory between the game. You don't even care about between the game. You're having fun when you're at the table, but you don't think about it between the game.
Wait, I think you might have just made me switch sides, because up until this point, I was on the side of, oh, I don't really like the numbers. I don't like the dice rolling nearly as much as I like the role playing. But what you just described, if I am in a dungeon with my group and then 5 real other people are there who I'm fucking with, and I have to, cast Otto's Irresistible Dance on this guy across the table and watch him mauled as he dances for 6 turns. That sounds way more fun.
You got it.
I would absolutely love that, because before that, I think I would just be, I might as well be playing solitaire or like typing numbers into a calculator. But yeah, if what you're describing as a war game is parties fighting and vying for the same resources, and looking like my opponents in the eye while we strategize against each other in the same way you might do on a Warhammer 40k table, that does sound a lot more fun, because then you can do the role-playing stuff in that, but that does sound better than a PvE experience. So maybe I switch sides.
How many wins?
Typical Soy Pill.
Normally you wouldn't be in the dungeon with them at the same time, because normally one group plays on Tuesday and one plays on Friday or something. But if you're the group on Tuesday and you get there before them and you know that there is a guy in the Friday game trying to enrich a civilization that you don't like, then you can totally leave traps behind, make it look unlooted.
Exactly. Picture this. You have
maybe
a
you
little
lost me now. If
something.
it's not on the same day, then it's just Mario Party where I'm leaving the fake item box and I kill someone.
Picture this, Soy.
30 meters behind me.
Soy, picture this. You are a wizard, right? There are certain spells in those books which are very obviously meant for the bad guy. Why would a player character ever use these? Things such as, I don't know, Glyph of Warding. Let's say you're actually a very powerful wizard. Let's say you're a Grundle Skald, something I'm working on at this moment in time. Let's say you know the spell Delayed Fireball. Let's say you also have a 9th level spell slot to spare, and you see a treasure chest you'd like to come back to later in Harmony's game, but you can't take it with you right this second. So you take your Glyph of Warding, you pop it on this treasure chest, and you pop in a Delayed Fireball upcast to level 9 with the max amount of time having elapsed, 80 average fire damage on the next poor unfortunate party that decides to come in and try and get it.
We are hitting on the core point that I'm making, right? Which is first of all, why I'm right and all of you are wrong except for maybe Harmony, right? And you too, Richard. No offense, right? But these rules, these specific rules are important because they increase interaction with the world and they increase the meaning of the choices you make. How much the choice you make matters. Jack just gave a scenario where if you don't play with encumbrance, that scenario never happens because there's no reason you can't take the chest.
Wargaming doesn't mean rules,
right?
does it?
Yes,
is
it
that
does.
Is that what you're
hold
saying?
On.
Wait,
hold on. The rules of a game, the rules of how. Otherwise, if rules don't matter, let me ask you this: in pursuit of knowledge, in pursuit of knowledge, if rules don't matter, right? And it doesn't matter. You're just playing D&D.
Did I say that?
I never. That's not what he's saying. That's not
never said that.
No, he's making a different point. Actually,
what is your point?
My point is that if that wargaming to you just means a rule set, then yeah, I agree, that's true. But what I'm talking about is that D&D
rule set.
Number one, D&D is a role-playing game that has rule sets based in, historiography, back in the 70s. That's fine. I'm not. But the number one point is that it is a role-playing game.
That's a war game that turned into one. Sure.
I would
That's
posit-
fine. You can say, hey, if that's what
It's
you want
not,
to say,
though, but
that's
go
fine.
ahead. Like what you're playing, is
And
not
I understand
Dungeons & Dragons.
flip flop soy pill over here. He's in the middle somewhere. We'll figure out one day.
You were playing
One
a
side will
different
win me
game
over, and
But there's
besides
no-
Dungeons
I'll
and
join your
Dragons, and you
campaign.
might like that game, but it's not Dungeons and Dragons. But go ahead, Richard.
I would posit this, that in order to take distinctly one side or the other, you would have to say, if you want to play strictly by what you would call war game rules, but you are not allowed to role play at all, versus if you're allowed to role play but you cannot use the rules at all. Would either of those be as fun as some mixture of the two? So that's where I get the argument of this is the most important part or that is the most important part. It's like Trey Parker and Matt Stone who make South Park. Like it's all about Trey or it's all about Matt, and we don't really know who makes the crazy stuff they make up. They just work together as a partnership.
Yeah, I
So,
completely.
yeah.
And that's exactly where I'm coming from is that we can understand that D&D, if we're talking about the whole game system, people do not think of it as a war game. The reason is because role playing is the most important part, with wargaming rule sets of whatever edition of book, whatever rules you want, secondary. Because as humans, we are social creatures and we like to categorize things, and we want to be able to have fun with each other because we're social animals. And I think that D&D is a role-playing game first. You can say it's a war game.
Well, I would say
but you were going to be wrong.
It's the evolution of the war game. Before Dave Arneson and people playing single characters and them getting into role playing, it was a war game. People didn't role play Napoleonic battles. They just had army versus army.
Richard,
And
in
then-
your dichotomy,
Mhm.
it would almost seem like, yeah, probably it wouldn't be as fun either way if you had to 100% roleplay, 100% war game. But would you argue
Yep.
that I think 100% roleplay would be just 100,000 times better, right? Otherwise, you're just rolling dice and hitting each other, whatever. Like even
then
in Warhammer,
then
which
it's-
is primarily that, if you're not screaming like an orc or like saying all the marine stuff, like it's not nearly as fun, right?
Then you've broken another definition, because if we're just sitting around 100% role playing, that's called improv. That's not really a game.
Sure.
Now, if we have chits that we draw out of a bucket with prompts and we improv those, now you're playing a game. If there's no rules to it, you're just making stuff up. It's not a game.
Is that your whole thing,
Oh.
Wick? Is that all games with rules are therefore war games? Like it's just a
Of course
war game
not.
to you?
Of course not. I think
The
that,
dichotomy.
Yeah,
oh,
go ahead. Harmony, please.
The dichotomy is between war game or board games and LARPs is kind of where Richard is going, and people play both of those, and people love both of those. I have
LARP is
participated
awesome.
in both and had a wonderful time. However, Dungeons and Dragons has always been a blend of a lot of things. You can see that in the old games, especially like with AD&D, you have a blend of a ton of different systems. Like everything isn't just roll to hit in AD&D. They have special rules for psionics. They have special rules for unarmed combat. They have special rules for a lot of things for mass combat. Those rules exist in the original texts. OD&D was originally a chainmail supplement, and so there's a bunch of, like, what the old games are a bunch of different systems stitched together in order to simulate a world, not a war, a world.
Yep.
I see. We've returned to me.
Well, finish up, Harmony,
Okay.
and then we can.
Right. So there are a bunch of systems stitched together, and really, it kind of doesn't make sense the first time you read them. It's really hard to understand without playing it. But I do believe it describes a mostly war game there. And yes, people role play, but like the role play actually came later. Like I believe with the old games, nobody was like getting into character. Nobody was, maybe they're getting into character, but nobody was doing funny voices. Now, I don't know that for sure because I wasn't there. That's just anecdotal. I was born in 1989, so I was obviously not there, but
I don't know if this is a disrespectful question, but Richard, were you there?
Yeah, I've been doing funny voices since 1985.
okay. See, that's what I see that on my videos and on my Twitter a lot. People will comment like, I didn't hear people doing funny voices until like 2010 for this game. That's something I hear quite often. I don't know how many people did that.
But
So.
before my time, like I would say the generation who really kicked it off in like the 70s were very much like, from what I experienced, the people I interacted with were very much more into dungeon crawl, procedural, level 1 of the dungeon, level 2 of the dungeon, level 3 of the dungeon. So it was sort of a game like that. It was like a level based resource management type of game. But we came along like mid to later 80s, and we just played like idiots. We liked the rules, but we didn't use all of them.
Mm.
Yeah, hey, this is okay.
So.
Oh, go ahead, please, and finish.
Yeah. So
How
that's
did I put this
something
panel
a lot
together?
of yeah, that's something a lot of people do actually is not know the rules. There are a lot of people who've been playing D&D for 40 years who've never read the DMG. And I'm not trying to like clown on you, Richard, or anything. You're actually
no.
one of my favorite. You're one of my favorite people on Twitter. So I don't want to clown on you specifically here.
I read those like that old first edition DMG. I must have memorized by now. I can actually find things in it from time to time when I'm looking for them, even though it's a complete mess. But we tried a lot of rules, but there were things like Gary Gygax in the Player's Handbook for First Edition had particular weapons versus particular types of armor adjustment chart, and we tried playing with that, and it bogged down the game so much that it was. And there's a lot of things in that DMG that are cool to use, like item saving throws, but if you use them all the time, they bulk up the game too much. So we ended up using the rules that didn't bog us down, as opposed to like I didn't not read them. We read through them. I applied. We tried a lot of them, but if it was no fun, we sort of were like, that's bogging us down. Let's put that over here.
So, if I may, right, and when you are first using a rule set, oh, did we lose someone? Oh no.
Yeah, he's backstage.
What happened? Okay.
He overdosed on soy.
This is the thing.
Sorry about that.
Whenever
Soy
there is a
flip
new
flopped
and
out of
unfamiliar-
here.
There's a couple
Typical
points.
flip flop.
Yeah, there's a couple points I want to make, so please bear with me. But the first one to you, Richard,
Running
right?
away.
There are rules that when you first engage with them, they're going to bog your game down because you are not familiar with them. You're not familiar with how they play. You're not familiar with the best practices to interact with those rules in the table. It takes time, and it's a skill issue. No offense or anything, but it's a way, like, as you do it, you will get better at it, and it will bog your game down less. So that's what I would posit. Like, there's Warhammer, for example. First game I played this in this edition took 4 hours. But as I get better, that's going to drop drastically as I get more familiar with the rules, how to implement them, as it gets quicker on the table. That's going to drop to like an hour or maybe 2, right? In half.
Well,
and so that's the first thing I would
that's
say.
kind of touching on what I was saying of the idea, like, Baldur's Gate 3 or any other simulator where it's like, look, these are the rules, and it does it at computer speed, the same speed every time. Even in the most efficient way, I think once you get too many, playable characters or too many enemies in one battle, that is when it gets bogged down for me, where it's like, okay, this is a little too much. And if it's a spectrum of bogged
then
down,
you
it almost
switch
sounds
to
like
a more
the
mass combat system. But there are
Okay.
ways to
Well, maybe
to-
that's a Baldur's
to
Gate
deal
3
with that, but
failure.
well, that's why there's
There's-
different mass combat rules, right? Than there are individual rules. But
There's a thing in game design too called modeling, or and granularity of modeling. So it's like, especially in a tabletop game, because your CPU is your human being's brain. But yes, I could make. So what you're saying is, if I made a game with super detailed rules for combat, and one combat may take 18 hours, but eventually it'll be 16. Eventually it'll be 14, and eventually it'll be 12. And I would say, no, that game is overly complex and convoluted for a tabletop game.
I'm sure
And I
some
think
people would like that though,
Well,
but
it's the example
I
of-
agree.
Yes, some people
If I
will.
have-
A diminishing amount every
I have an
for every
hour-
bit of
Yes.
complexity. Yeah.
If I have an hour to play a board game, there are board games that I simply will not play because I know that they will take a longer than an hour to
Yes.
do. Right?
Yes.
Right. So,
So
so the definition of a best game would be the average number of hours people have to play.
I kind
just-
of would disagree with you on Richard on that, because to me, it's not about the popularity of a game. It's more about how much fun people that play the game have. Now, that's
Yeah.
a lot harder to quantify, and I'm sure
if it's
yeah, but
if it's overly complex in whatever time you have,
I
it will
agree.
be less fun. If it's not complex enough to engage your brain, it will be less fun. So you want
Yeah.
a game that is how much
in the
time do
middle
the average
somewhere.
person has to play, and it matches that
yeah,
level
like
of complexity.
I love Twilight Imperium. I
Oh,
thought I
me
loved
too.
Twilight Imperium, and then it took fucking forever to play the game. It's too complex,
Yep.
right?
I would argue
yeah,
that-
I agree. Yeah,
I'm a huge
Anyone
Twilight
who
Imperium
argues
fan.
from
I need to play that.
I
game.
knew that already,
Twilight
Harmony. You didn't have to
Imperium
tell me.
is a blast. Do not denigrate that. But here's the
Fun little
here's my
lunch
second
sesh.
point, if I may. There is a. Well, let me ask you this. I'll ask you this in pursuit of knowledge. What is the difference between Settlers of Catan and Twilight Imperium? What makes those games different?
That one's a war game and one.
No.
I'm joking.
No. There's a simple answer. The answer is
what
this.
you think? No,
The answer
no.
is
it's
the rules.
Time.
The
Now,
rules.
okay,
The rules make them different.
you mean the name of the game?
Not
Like,
the name, the rules, the mechanics.
That is
of
what.
which
No, the
game
name is
played.
talking about the
That's
type
why
of
my
game
argument
it is.
here is that D&D has a specific set of rules, and if you aren't playing by those rules, you are not playing D&D. You are playing another game.
I disagree. Yeah, definitely
Oh
disagree.
yeah,
there.
it seems like everyone here would
I
disagree
definitely
with our
disagree.
because we're talking about
Yes.
different editions with different rules,
Correct.
and it's all still D&D, right? Like,
I
I
might
think
be
that-
able to
Are
provide.
we
Wick is not
playing
gonna be able to sleep
D&D right
tonight.
now?
One more. I won't jump in here because Harmony's been trying to say something forever. So Harmony.
Gosh, there's so much to respond to. Okay, so first of all, house rules. I'm actually fine with some house rules. Other house rules, I think, break the game. It's hard to tell. You have to engage with the game, I think, first, using rules as written as much as possible so that you can master the rule sets and learn which rules are really, I think Ardubs put it as load bearing, because sometimes people will change a rule and they won't understand the ripple effects it has throughout the rest of the game, and it will destroy major features of the game that they never even knew existed. And this is the case with Dungeons and Dragons, because there were specific rules in the old game. I will use the example of one-to-one timekeeping. I know I use that example all the time, but it is a true example, that create dynamics in the game that I call Bronstein dynamics, but really what that is, let me define that. That is multiple actors interacting in conflict under a fog of war. It creates that sort of dynamic over time, and people saw that rule and they were like, why would we do one-to-one timekeeping? That's silly. It makes no sense. And they threw it out, and it didn't make an appearance in any later editions because people didn't understand what that rule did. And so now you have people who are going back and playing with that and discovering that there is a completely different game here than anything they've played in the past 25 years.
Yep.
I mean, okay, yes. Is that but you're kind of loading that, right? Is that a bad thing?
Loading it how?
Are you implying? It seems
is
like
that
you're
loaded?
implying that it's you're implying that it's a bad thing, that it's a different thing than
that
it
was a
was
bad thing.
originally. That
But,
D&D today,
so-
Wick
The
is
question
argument.
is
That's
Dungeons
hard
and
to say.
Dragons a war game? And she has identified Dungeons and Dragons as being first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons,
Right.
which is a war
I
game.
am saying
therefore, she
that-
wins. Is what she's trying to say.
No,
No,
my
no,
God.
that's not
Let
what
her
I'm
say it.
trying
Let
to
her say it.
say.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
no.
Yeah.
I misunderstood.
I'm
I
saying
apologize.
that the game there is so different from the game now that the word Dungeons and Dragons has such a
Pretty
broad meaning that this is an impossible debate, because if we're looking at the old games or what the game was originally conceived as, then yes, it is a war game. However, today has gone through so many iterations and people have thrown out rules without even understanding what they do, that it has morphed into something that is closer to Tunnels and Trolls, which is a good game, by the way. I have nothing against Tunnels and Trolls, but that's what that's what most games actually
this is
are
the
focused
ship
on
of
in the
Theseus
original.
problem, right?
Exactly.
Also,
Yeah.
Harmony,
Yeah.
I think you're
I agree
approaching
with you
this
totally.
from this mistaken background of I'm going to use facts and good arguments to back up my
Yeah.
argument. When the prompt is what is it best played as, not what it is, which I think you clearly have demonstrated it is in its original capacity and probably for many times a war game, and especially a lot of people play it that way. But what is better, right? Like, and so this should just be a dumb opinion shouting match, probably, rather than
Okay.
yeah. You might be
Yeah.
way
All right.
overprepared.
Let me shout my dumb opinion then. I think when you're talking about playing the game the best, you should look at playing the game the best. The best way to play the game is the way that it was written. Like if you play Monopoly, but you take money off of free parking, then you're not playing Monopoly right. You're playing
No,
Monopoly
I love free
objectively
parking.
inferior to someone else who does who
love this.
use
This
free
is
parking as a
hilarious.
money sink. Because the only metric we have to determine how well you are playing it is how well you're playing it in comparison to the original text. We don't have an
no.
objective.
She's right,
see,
though, man.
no,
She's
she's
right.
not. Here's the
She
problem
is
with that.
just
Here,
right.
no, no.
Let her,
The problem with that.
One at a time. Let her finish, and then you can respond. I promise.
She did finish.
You know, yeah, I think
Okay.
he said he
Respond.
can go.
So the whole point, what you're saying is objectively incorrect, because the reason why D&D survived, and
Nope.
He
Uh-oh.
died. He's dead.
Oh.
Obviously, Harmony wins.
D&D survived.
additions.
Oh, he's back.
You just cut out. We didn't hear a
You
single
cut out.
thing
You
you
rolled a
said.
The
reason
critical
why
one on
D&D
your
survived, go
internet
on.
connection.
Don't
so-
tell me. Oh, Jesus. All right. So the whole reason why why we're talking about D&D today, and the reason why you're objectively wrong, is because it changed. D&D changed to what it is today. That's why it's surviving. That's why it's thriving. That's why it's amazing, and that's why we're even talking about it today. Why is it so good? It's because 5th edition is superior in every way. 4th edition, everybody knows the worst one, and there is objective reasoning. That's an objective fact. I'm sorry. We don't need to go to the historical, sacred text
You've given subjective
of the
opinion
histrionics
and
of D&D
over it.
to talk
Well
about
done.
that is the
I do
best
not
version.
measure
This is
quality
wrong.
by sales.
Let me in.
That is not the metric I use to measure quality.
Let me in here. Let me in here.
that-
Because
Well, everyone wants to go in.
okay,
Everyone
go
wants to
ahead.
go in. Everyone wants to go in.
Okay, real quick, Jack. 1 second. So first of all, I want to say I believe you are correct that 4th edition is the worst. I do think 5th edition was an improvement on 4th edition, so I will give you that
So
one.
wrong.
And
I still like 4th.
I like pointing out, places where we agree. But also, I think that I think that 5th edition and what we have now, normal groups, I think they can create quality games. I think I've run quality games with 5th edition. I think I've run objectively amazing games with 5th edition. However, I think that we don't really have, I'm not saying best in quality, like your game's better than my game's better than your game. I'm saying the best representation we have for Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not saying that is the most superior game to ever have been created. I'm saying if we have it,
To whose
I'm saying
metric?
that is exactly. That's why I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm
Gotcha.
saying that the best way to play a game is as it is written in general, because that's the best representation of the game. That said, I think if you master the rules, house ruling is fine. Playing another edition other than AD&D is fine. There's nothing wrong with these things. However, I do think there are some superior and inferior games, and I think anyone who's played at more than one table can attest to that.
I think your comment on load bearing mechanics is super relevant. Because there's been mechanics I've dropped from games that have had no effect or even a positive effect. But if something is load bearing to the actual play experience, there was what's his who did the there's a YouTuber anyway, Matt Colville. He did a thing a while ago about how the equipment list in 5th edition, this is a few years back, is basically just an atrophied add-on of what you used to use it for in older editions. And to me, that really resonated because we used to get all that equipment. That all meant something. We would use that. So I don't know about objectively better or not, but it can evolve into you're not actually playing the game or having the same experience that people had, and it slowly drifts into a whole new creature.
And that's not bad. That's not a bad thing. That's what I'm advocating for.
I would
Jack,
like
go
to say what I was going to say, if I may.
I'm sorry, Jack.
That's all
Sorry,
right.
Jack.
I am not entirely with
On his
Harmony in what I'm
birthday,
about
too.
to say.
Go ahead, yeah, Jack.
Not anymore. Not as of 9 minutes ago.
Okay, never mind. Screw him.
The fifth edition is quite simply, if we're going to use objective measurement, not just personal preference, fifth edition is not, by a long shot, not the best edition of Dungeons and Dragons. It is the most streamlined. It is the most easily palatable. It is the most, I would like to say, slop that Dungeons and Dragons has got to and been successful, because it is mass market appeal. The thing with mass market appeal is you then need to start removing key things from previous editions in order to make it more presentable to a fresher audience. I started with 3.5 back in school, because I was born in 95. I'm 30 years old, boys and girls. Good God, my back hurts. And what 3.5 did, which is objectively better than 5th edition, is intelligence actually matters in that game, whereas in 5th it is a dump stat. You do not need intelligence. In 3.5, your intelligence gave you more skills. There are more moving parts in 3.5. AC was better in 3.5. You had 3 AC stats, not just one. Each one did different things in different situations, so you were able to simulate things more easily. You go back further to 3rd and to 2nd. I'm only really familiar with 2nd through games like Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2. By the way, Soy, they are far superior to Baldur's Gate 3. Go and play them. Far, far superior. If you've not got them, I will gift you Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition on Steam. Hit me up.
Free stuff.
So the idea that stripping things down and streamlining and giving mass market appeal makes things better is ludicrous, because it is quite simply the opposite. The more things open up and become more easily accessible, the less they are able to be unique. And I think that is the problem with 5th edition. You're seeing it now in D&D 2024, where things are just becoming even sillier than 5th. I quite like 5th. I play 5th mostly because that is what my players like. I would go back to 3.5, to be honest, because I was quite happy there. 5th is an objective standard, not just by how you like it, and I quite like 5th, just keep that in mind. It is a stripped-down version of what has come before. 3.5, if you want to get crunchier, you want a good role-playing experience that isn't as wargamey as you seem to have distaste for, go and check out 3.5. I actually had them out over this long weekend with one of my 5th edition players. I had my core rulebooks out for 3.5. I was going through them with him and said, look, you can read these because look how much 5th took from this. You can go back to this and you'll find a better game.
How high a game did you run in 3.5? How high did the characters get level?
Oh, God. It was a big group. Played mostly of a play-by-post via Skype, believe it or not, because we all lived way, way, way far away from each other. I think my Paladin maybe got to 9 or 10.
Okay.
But there are some other players in that group when I was DMing that were getting into the 12 and 13 range, but we are talking 20 years ago now.
This is
Well,
go ahead, Richard.
Sorry, I was just going to say quickly, when we played it years ago, it started out pretty good at lower levels, but as you get higher and higher levels, the preponderance of rules and the complication of the monsters and all of the extra outside, the simulation can break it just as much as streamlining.
I actually agree.
Yeah.
The problem that I found with higher level Dungeons and Dragons players, it becomes a cakewalk in 5th edition. Like there is nothing that will stop a high level party in 5th. Nothing.
In 3rd and 3.5, to me, it didn't become a cakewalk in that version, but it became such a beast to run as a DM.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
I can definitely see it. I
Yeah.
mean, 11, 10-year-old me was definitely experiencing that, but I suppose I was so young back then that it didn't really matter to me because I had the time that I could spend figuring stuff out. Nowadays, whew.
I know it's very popular in this kind of space to hate on 5th edition.
Again, I love 5th edition.
It's to do it.
Oh no.
Oh dear.
They're getting him.
He's dead.
He loves 5th edition.
Did you want to say something, Harmony?
I'm gonna.
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Okay. No.
Yeah, you're.
He's
I
got to
mean,
get
your
it.
webcam stopped too. You're like a
think-
robot.
Oh,
No,
I
you're
think he
back.
might be back. You back?
Jack, I gotta tell you
back?
about the.
sorry. Hello.
I gotta
didn't
tell
do
you
anything.
sometime about the
Oh, yeah,
time I
play back.
TPK'd a level 12 party with like 9 shadows.
What in fifth?
in
or
5th
3.5?
edition. In 5th edition.
Shadows are
Fifth edition.
brilliant for that.
I
They
know,
are
right?
brilliant.
But anyway,
And I used to have more of that in 3.5. With
right?
more like
I
level
actually
drip.
agree with you about it. I don't have any problem with 5th edition. My problem with the modern game in general is basically boils down to the fact that it's lost a lot of principles from the old games by throwing out load-bearing rules, which you can
I
add
would
back
ag-
in. Like that's not
I would
a problem.
agree with you to like a certain extent. Like I find with fifth, it's really easy to put it on the torture rack and just bloodily beat it and break it to do what I want it to do. But if I wanted to do something by the book, so to speak, I would go back to 3.5, or I would do like
If you wanted to
I mean
play
I
Dungeons
break
and
out the
Dragons,
first edition
yeah.
stuff and just slot that in there
I
somewhere.
mean, so I don't even know what to respond to now because I want to let In Pursuit of Knowledge talk.
Am I here?
Yeah,
Can you guys hear
Yes,
me?
you're here.
yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah.
can hear
Okay,
you
all
now.
right, sorry.
You're good. So
Like I didn't do anything different.
Yeah.
All right, sorry. So my whole point was talking about how much hatred there is in this space for 5th edition. I understand why, but my main question was about if we were in 2003, 4 when 3.5 came out, and Harmony was talking to you about the fact that first edition is superior, or Wick was saying that 3.5 isn't real D&D. How dare you think that it's D&D? How would you react? What kind of arguments would you give?
I mean, these arguments were had. In
yeah,
fact,
Right.
I can.
do you guys in the D&D space here know Esper the Bard?
I don't.
I'm vaguely aware of him.
I've been following his channel since the beginning, since like 2006. I went back recently to a 4th edition story that he was running and sort of playing on his own and narrating it. And I remember that vividly because I loved it. It's what made me go and get the 4th edition books. I quite like 4th edition. It's a guilty pleasure. I remember as he was playing through, he was having everyone in the comments saying, "This isn't real Dungeons and Dragons. Go back to 3.5. Go back to 3rd." Esper now is moving on to D&D 2024. I would not say for a second that Esper is not playing Dungeons and Dragons because he's been here since the beginning, before any of us. He's been moving with
Are you
editions
just
every
afraid to
time.
offend him?
No, he's simply there is a certain pedigree of nerd that is in him that I respect.
So
I'll put it that way.
It's just a. So
So-
this is.
No, it's not that. It's like these arguments have always happened. Is my point.
Yes.
Um,
Can I answer this question too?
Yes, answer
I'm
the
sorry.
question. I have an answer too.
my
but go
answer,
first,
my
and I'll
answer
go.
is I didn't care then. I don't care now. But go for it. Hannah.
Yeah. So I'm actually still reasonably new to the online discourse regarding this. I'm kind of a longtime player, but I didn't really get online and start talking about it until maybe last year. And when I did, it was, I guess, 2 years ago, there was a group of guys that were going around Twitter and telling people, "You're not playing real D&D." Or this, like, if you're playing anything other than this, you're not playing real D&D. And the first like
Was it Wick?
thought.
I mean, is he in the room right now?
It wasn't. It wasn't.
Oh.
It was it was actually a group of guys, and it was a man named Jeffro Johnson was at the center of it. But anyway, so they were going around telling people you're not playing real D&D. That this is real D&D, and they were saying it, I guess, not so much as an insult, but more as a challenge. And I like. It hurt my feelings at first. I was like, "You don't know my game. How do you know that's not real D&D? Like, why? Why do you say that?" And then I started reading these guys' blogs. Like, there were several of them. I was like going through their blogs. Like, why are they telling me I'm not playing real D&D? And I learned something from that, which was that there are integral rules to the game that make it a completely different game that were sort of lost or thrown out in the early 90s that people don't use anymore. And I was like, okay, so this is strange and I kind of want to try it because I can kind of see how this is going to like change my game, and I want to try it and see what happens. And so I tried it, and I leaned into using Bronstein dynamics, and and the time rule. Those were the two things. I was like, okay, I'm gonna, let my players do Bronstein dynamics and time rule, and we're just gonna see what happens. We're just gonna use 5th edition, see how this changes the game. We're not gonna have a plot. We're just gonna go with it and see what happens. And I understand what they mean. I get it now. I understood what they meant when they told me I wasn't playing real D&D, because this is something completely different. And it is the game described at the beginning of the PHB, of the AD&D PHB, which is, it's not the same game that you play now. It's a game where, like, the DM doesn't even know what's going to happen from session to session, because you have people that are controlling different factions, and you have player characters that are kind of against other player characters, and people are so invested in the game because they want to make sure they can, like, build things and get things done before the other guys do. And they're like, there's like 2 guys in an assassination war now, and the story, I have no story. It is completely player driven. The story right now is I that would take too long to explain, but it is completely player driven, and we have big worldwide events happening that are totally made by the players, and I couldn't plan something like this. It is just so different from, like, normal 5e.
What I'm hearing is that you got Stockholm syndrome. Basically, you were bullied online until I'm joking.
I mean, I wouldn't say I was bullied.
I'm joking.
I think they were a little bit nicer to me because I'm a girl. Because, like, I've seen people bullied over this, but
It's probably true.
And I also don't think that telling people you're not playing real D&D is necessarily bullying, but I wanted to know what they meant. What do you mean by this?
You're saying about like the surprises and the way that, like, your story gets driven by the players. Is
my
that more based on the evolving story of the group? Is that not more based on the role playing and not on the mechanics themselves? Like, there are mechanics that facilitate that, but because of their creativity and role playing, it happens.
That is actually a really good question. I would say it's a mix, because the mechanics of it that really facilitate the wargame dynamics are mostly the time rule is a big one, because each of them have time where their character is doing something, but we're not necessarily at the table. And so we lean into using a fog of war for that. So, like, for example, if you do this on a party-wide level, you might have a situation where, like, you come to the game one week and the thief has, like, this really expensive magical brooch, and you're like, where did you get that? And of course, like, a big noble in the city is missing theirs, and I'm like, what were you up to, right? So you have, like, little things like that, but also this happens on a larger scale than, like, the group level. This happens on, like, a really large scale level where week to week there are troops moving about the map, there are people fighting each other. Things like that. So you have these big worldwide events that mean that every session isn't necessarily going to be a direct continuation of the last one, because you have a living world going, and you might explore a different part of the world, or you're like, oh, there's going to be a really big battle here, so we're going to explore this week. But every player has a massive investment, because every player is controlling, like, multiple characters. They have, like, they have their big faction or god. So it's like a completely different game than I ever would have thought it would be. What was the question? Did I answer that? I did. I answered it.
The question was semi. I mean, I guess my question was, this sounds like a lot of fun, but is it happening on this scale because of the investment from the players more, or more because the rule set says you must be doing these things that push you in a way that is going to cause more fun?
The rule set incentivizes it.
Okay.
Yes, the mechanics drive player interactions. They encourage and, in some cases, insist on players buying into the game in a way that other rule systems, other editions, simply do not.
Yeah, because and this is, again, my position as an ignorant person. When I say I enjoy the role playing more, I sympathize. I can't, because I never played 5th edition, 4th edition, 3rd edition. Like, I just kind of got into it as one of these slop enjoyers, if you will. But I can sympathize with the idea of your nerdy hobbies turning into slop. I mean, Star Trek, Star Wars, Mass Effect was like a really good one for me, where I love Mass Effect 1. I love the, like, immersion, the world building, the thermal clips.
I'm
didn't
sorry
exist
for
yet.
what's about to happen to
And
your,
then,
your Yeah.
My franchise, yes, exactly. And then Mass Effect 2 came and just kind of slopified it and said, well, more games are doing this, and let's do that. And it does sort of lose its identity. I understand where that's coming from. And if you get, if you do it long enough, then if you take all the mechanics away, you streamline everything, well, okay, well, why not just all sit at the table and have a tea party and pretend it's just improv at that point? I guess my question is, it does seem to me that even though these mechanics might make it better or more distinct, which I appreciate, that the players and their role-playing abilities are what really does make it more fun. If everyone's just, hey, these are the rules, and it's this calculator of a game, that's not as fun as people getting invested and being that. And it still seems to me that it's a majority of role-playing. Again,
Well,
totally.
absolutely.
The rules.
well,
He's back on our side. Thank you. We welcome
I gotta
you,
keep
Soy.
flip-flopping. Hey, there's 30 minutes left for me to flip-flop. Don't thank me.
The rules drive the
Go
investment
ahead,
in the
Harmony,
game.
please.
Yeah, the rules drive the investment into the game. And if you don't mind me interjecting, I'm going to go on a wild side tangent here. If Mass Effect is your favorite game, if you really like Mass Effect, I have to try Star Control 2. It's like from the 90s. It's free on Steam. It's called Free Stars, the Urquan Masters. It is the greatest game ever, and it directly inspired Mass Effect. You should absolutely try that. Anyway, but it's a great example of a war game too that is very roleplay heavy.
Yep.
I certainly do believe that role playing has a place in D&D, and I'm a role player. I'm a story gamer. I'll like call myself a story gamer because well no you don't understand. Because I think the greatest stories come from war games. I think war drives story. Conflict drives story.
It's the role playing that drives it, and then we have a rule set that settles it.
No.
Let
Can I throw something? Can I throw something quick in here? Okay, tabletop role playing games came from wargaming, right? The evolution, the change that made it a tabletop role playing game was that they added the role playing. You could play a character. Before that, war games where you played big armies. You didn't pretend to be anyone. You didn't pretend all this stuff. So if D&D is best played as a war game, that means no role playing, right?
Why?
But I think what we're all talking about is a hybrid. Because that's not how they did the war game. That's the actual genesis of D&D was adding the role-playing aspect.
If I have a cake,
they did not do it. If everyone did it before, then wargaming would be role-playing.
To that cake,
this man's
no
correct.
longer a cake. If I have a cake and I add frosting to that cake, is it suddenly no longer a cake?
If I have an animal and I give it gills, then subset is fish. That does not make a squirrel a fish.
Grandmother had wheels. Would she be a bike?
If you take a squirrel and you add gills to it, it's still a squirrel. Much as like if you take a war game and you add role playing to it, it's still a war game. Exactly. I agree. Thanks for making my point.
This is a Loki's wager situation, right? If you added enough frosting, it would stop being a cake. It would be a pile of frosting. So depending on how much role playing you add, this does change whether or not it is a cake.
And we can make it into a new thing, like we would call it something else. Like that's the main thing is
tabletop role playing did not exist when wargamings existed. Wargamings, by definitionally, were sans role playing because role playing was not invented until after. Definitionally, it does not include.
Do you think no one role played these other things? Like that's
not on
true.
Tabletop.
It was
wait.
There wasn't just a codified way of doing it.
Dave Arneson was a genius
D&D
for adding role playing.
Okay, there was diplomacy.
Dave Arneson was a genius for adding role playing to it.
The response to this is actually being shouted in the chat multiple times by R-Dubs here. It is one of my favorite games from the 50s, is Diplomacy. Is Diplomacy a war game? I would say Diplomacy is a war game.
No, that's a role-playing game.
You think Diplomacy isn't a war game?
No, it's a role-playing game first. You're pretending
to
be... Oh my
gosh.
The whole point is to conquer.
Yes, by diplomacy, by arguing.
Yeah.
What do you... Are you guys kidding?
Oh,
No.
well, I
Yeah,
gotta
we-
Google it so I can
No.
have an opinion. Give me a second.
We talked the root of
While you're
wargaming
googling
was
that, allow me to bring something up. The whole point of a rule set being there and to have mechanics behind roleplay. I'll go back to Mr. Kuntz, considering he helped make the thing. He was on an interview with Clownfish TV where he said that that the concept is applying causality to imagination. If you're a child playing in the back garden with your friends and you say, let's build a rocket and go to the moon, then all that happens is, boom, you've made this imaginary rocket and it's blasted off and you've gone to the moon. The idea of Dungeons and Dragons, by adding dice and probability and other such things, is you apply, well, is our rocket successful in getting to the moon, or does it veer off course? Or do we add in these other unexpected variables, so to speak, in order to make things more interesting? So the reason that we use rule sets and the reason that you lose things when you take away from rules, and again, I don't use one-to-one time, but I will definitely say I can see sitting over here in the people not using one-to-one time, looking over there at the people using one-to-one time, that's the better way of doing things. I understand why it opens up so many other avenues. It just definitely wouldn't work with my scatterbrained players. And if you take away mechanics, you then remove game, and all you have is play.
well, one-to-one time is a mechanic. It is from wargaming. It is
Yes.
not wargaming.
Correct.
But
Right.
it is just
And-
the example I was using in terms of
Yep.
removing causality from play.
Yep. But when people played, like, wargaming goes back to, let's say, the Napoleonic war game, where you would have units of Napoleonic armies fighting against each other and simulating battles. They didn't pretend to be a soldier, a French soldier
I
in a,
I promise
and the
you,
genius
a
of
lot
Dave Arneson. You promised me, yeah, but nobody made a game out of it. Dave
Perhaps
Arneson
they
was
didn't
the one
codify it.
who.
That's true.
Dave
You're
Arneson was the
correct.
one
They
who
didn't
made
codify
the
it,
game.
but they absolutely did.
Right. So, but the focus was it was a strategy war game. They didn't go, let's role play a war game. That role playing wasn't in the lexicon.
When did reenactment become a thing? Like historical
reenactment's
battle
been going on for-
reenactment? The reason I
Um,
ask
Long time.
is because I participate in it from time to time myself as a 12th century footman.
Mhm.
I've got my shield and sword and kit over there. If this is something that predates wargaming and RPGs and role-playing in such, I can guarantee you, when I'm wearing that helm and someone else is pretending to be historical figure at a battle of historical place that I live in and shan't dox myself, then
Yeah.
they are playing a character.
This is something
The
that
focus-
happened in ancient Rome. I just looked it up.
So D&D is best played as a reenactment,
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
which is maybe,
No way,
which is
bro.
maybe an
Come
argument.
on,
Which
this
is maybe an
getting
argument.
wild.
That's called
Is that an
live
argument?
action role play. I've done that too. It's hilarious.
Yeah, yeah.
and
If that's
fun.
the argument you could make, I'd say like, yeah, maybe.
But no,
But
the end, look,
because
look,
at least that includes playing a role.
let me
My
define,
point is
maybe
that
this'll
people
help.
could
Maybe
pretend
this'll
to be
help, because I'm not
Napoleon
only
whilst
gonna
moving their
define
figures around.
wargaming, but I'm
They
gonna
could, but
define
they didn't
Dungeons and
until Dave
Dragons.
Arneson codified it.
Dungeons and Dragons is a specific set of rules with core load bearing. I love that term. Rules that if you do not use these rules, it is no longer Dungeons and Dragons. That's why when I play Warhammer 40,000, no one is under any illusion that I am playing Dungeons and Dragons, because there are different sets of rules that are used. I can't say, hey, I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, because the rule set is remarkably different. Now, you can have variations on a theme, certainly, right? But the core set of load-bearing Dungeons and Dragons rules have been defined best, I feel, in second edition. Actually, I like AD&D better. But AD&D in first edition kind of set these things up, and you can build off of that. But as soon as you start building too much, it ceases to be Dungeons and Dragons. It becomes something else. And you might like that. You might like that better. You might think that's more enjoyable. Fair enough. but then you're not playing Dungeons and Dragons. And
Wick,
this is if I may finish, please. Like, the reason why it's important to define Dungeons and Dragons by a specific set of rules is so that we know what is and is not that game. So, for example, if the rules don't matter, if we could use pretty much any rule set and add some role playing and maybe some dice, right, or some other things, then we could play Dungeons and Dragons right now. Like, this could be a diceless Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, that's why it's called the Kleenex of role playing games.
But no one would mistake this panel for a Dungeons and Dragons game. No one would look at it and say, "That's Dungeons and Dragons."
Well, hold on. Did you roll for initiative? I didn't see you roll yet.
Wick, I'm agreeing with you in terms of the codified rules define the game. That's why I was saying war games. Absolutely nothing mentioned about role-playing in war games back in the day, before role-playing games were created. And the definition that Harmony was reading from AD&D does mention role-playing. That's where it came into context. That's where it came into the rules.
So I don't think anybody is really arguing that Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have role-playing. I'm arguing that the early editions fit the definition of a war game and have enough in common with a war game that you can call them war games. I do believe that the game has, and that is not the conventional way that people play them, but when played by the rules as written. Now,
the Bible was written over thousands of years, right? But we still have a certain versions of the Bible, right? The King James version, whatever. We still call each version the Bible. Right, Rick? Can we agree on that?
That
even
is
the
something
people
that
who follow
you
it
would
can't
have
agree on that.
big
I would
debates
that
about
as an
this.
argument.
Oh, shit.
But they held a whole council, the Council of Nicaea, where they decided which books were core and which were not.
That's
so
right.
If I took the Bible, right, and then I started adding books to it, like if I said, I'm going to add my journal, and I'm going to call it the Bible, people would be like, that's not the Bible.
Well, no, it has to be the right people, right? And unfortunately for you, Wick, it has to be the right people, Wick. And unfortunately for you, Wizards of the Coast are the ones, the Council of Nicaea, that determines what is Dungeons and Dragons. And you, sir, have been bested because
I think they're wrong.
I think you're wrong. And look, here's the thing, Wick. You can make your splinter off group and put your 4th edition, gatekeeping label over D&D, but it is a role-playing game. That is so important. And I think it's we've been keep hammering to the fact that originally it was a war game. Fine. But it still had role-playing elements to it, sure, like Richard was saying earlier, and that it turned into, if not was 50-50, it is now 100%, not 100%, 80% a role-playing game with a rule set determined by Wizards of the Coast to make it into the game called D&D. Can we? I mean, is that so hard?
If the thing I was getting at with the animal comparison, if we said all animals evolved from fish that came out of the ocean, let's say you took that, right? So the origin one is fish. So in this case, I'm saying the origin one is wargaming. Now, as soon as that fish could become amphibious, which goes on land and in water, or just is not amphibious, becomes like a mammal that can't breathe water and all that stuff, those things definitionally become not fish, right? So saying a donkey is best as a fish is just definitionally wrong, because in order to meet the definition of war game, that predates role-playing. So if your definition of what you want to do with D&D includes role-playing, it's not a war game. It's some 10 to 90% hybrid of wargaming with role-playing.
True. It's 10%.
We've entered the 4th category.
No.
What do I keep saying, man?
You keep saying 4th. I'm really confused.
So the 4th category,
what's the third one?
I felt too stupid to ask. But
so
what's
the 4th
third
category is something put forward by Robert Kuntz, who was one of the original developers of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeons and Dragons. He was there just after Blackmore, I believe it was, when Arneson came down to show Gygax and co. what was up. And he describes this as a sort of wargaming role-playing hybrid, where it's something that's never been done before. It's completely new, which is what I think Richard is sort of touching on here. That it's like an evolution of something. It is something completely new. However, and this is where I sort of straddle the fence a little bit, but I lean towards Harmony's side. Is that yes, it is a role play. Hello, cat. Thank you. Yes, Chew. Yes, it is a role-playing game, but the roots of it, the mechanics of it, the reason the role-play happens is because the rules are a certain way. The rules say that you are not you are Morgan Iron Wolf, and then you have a different character set up while she's traveling to go and do something else, and you have these conflicts that happen which drive story naturally. It is a bottom-up approach, a grassroots approach to storytelling, if you will, rather than a DM saying, here is the big bad evil guy, which, by the way, I enjoy doing that. I enjoy creating a Dark Lord happening that is doing his own thing somewhere in the world. But if the players don't want to go over that direction, and they much rather would set up a smuggling operation on a completely different continent, they're more than welcome to do so, because my job is to simulate the world, and eventually the Dark Lord will come for them regardless, because he is gathering strength at the same pace they are, if not quicker.
Sounds like a lot of role playing
Well,
to me.
well, then the
Yes,
best.
you're right. I'm not saying
best,
it's not.
The best.
No
the
one
best
here
statement.
is.
The best statement of your thesis then is D&D is best played as a war game, or sorry, D&D is best played as a role playing game with particular mechanics from war games, which can add to the enjoyment.
The best statement is D&D is a hybrid of both.
Yes, exactly. But a
So-
pure war game, no.
No.
I don't think anyone here
I-
is saying it is a pure.
Yeah,
I'm not.
The
Wick's right here in the
thesis
room.
says
I want to hear. Hold on.
is D&D best played as a war game?
Yes, but let's go. I want to hear from Harmony. Go ahead.
Yeah, I even said in the chat beforehand that I'm not a purist on this issue. I don't think it is 100% a war game. It is a combination of things. But I will say that I think that while at the table you might experience it as like 80 to 90% a role-playing game, that 10 to 20% of war game there, it changes everything. It changes the whole game. And I would consider it to be a war game based on that 10 to 20%. And that is because, well, I think I've explained this already. That is because like having the players operating, and I apologize if I am not actually responding to what was said. I had to go pee. But having the players operating independently above the table and driving worldwide events and driving a living world with a story that involves conflict between players, that is a lot more interesting than the conventional game that we get today, in my opinion, I guess. I will say. But it's more interesting than the conventional game we get today of like, the group of players that are off to recover an artifact to fight the BBEG who is controlled by the DM.
That sounds fun.
It is fun.
I have
She's
no
not saying it's
problem
not.
with that game. I really don't have a problem with that. I'm saying that having the players operating in conflict against one another above the table even makes the game so much better.
I wholeheartedly agree.
I would not want to call that a war game, simply because the additional part, which is the role playing, is what Dave Arneson, Gary Gygax, those creators get credit for. They created something new. If we just say everything they did was just a war game, then we're kind of like taking away the credit from the genius they did of adding storytelling and role playing to it.
So I'm not saying it was just a war game. Like I said, I'm not a purist on this issue. However,
Right. So none of
I'm
us
actually
agree with the
using-
thesis.
well,
correct.
I even said in the chat, like when I was invited, like I'm kind of I'm not a purist, but anyway, I'm actually using the definition of war game that you laid out in the chat, which was player versus player. Each player commands a force, and the referee settles disputes. I believe that it fits that definition, and so I am calling it a war game. Yeah. And that was your definition, not really mine. I think there are a lot of different definitions of it. Now, I'm not saying it can't be a role-playing game too. I'm just saying that
Well, I
the
would say
way
the thing I've added since we've been talking is war games, and I could have added that third point, but in the chat the other day, I just pulled out my base thing. But I would add another coordinate to that then, and it would be like, since war games predated the codified role playing into gaming, then therefore that fourth coordinate is that war games do not have role playing by default codified in the rules.
Then
well,
Whereas after Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax, they did, which makes it a tabletop role play.
I will say, Richard, I see what your point is there. However, I would say that the codification does not preclude that role playing happen beforehand. If we were to use the Bible example again, the codification of the Bible in the Council of Nicaea didn't preclude the fact that people were using these books and other books that weren't included in the codification prior to that council for about a century and a half as sacred scripture in church services before. So the idea of codification being the start point for the role playing is something I would have issues with, although I do see your point that codification was where it became hybridized. I mean, again, I hate to keep bringing up Mr. Kuntz because it sounds like all I want to do is agree with him and sort of keep citing him for some sort of brownie point. But I do agree with what he says when he says it's concept design first. That concept being a simulated wargaming world with a role-playing lever on top. So I think the role-play is essential to the game because it comes out of this idea of there being a conflict within a story. Now, again, I'm sort of sat on the fence here because I don't use the one-to-one time, etc. And I really have no issue with the Lord of the Rings Go and Destroying the Ring campaign either, because I've played that the majority of the time. However, I prefer sort of a semi-West Marcher game. Oh no, he died. That's a shame. Oh well.
Crit fail.
I think to a certain extent we're talking past each other because none of us is saying no role play. Harmony is saying role play from the ground up, whereas you are appearing to say, correct me if I'm wrong, role play from the top down.
That's correct.
Then I think, look, the best way of doing it is simply whatever works at your table at the time. I mean, even Gygax and Arneson and Kuntz themselves freely admit that where expediency allows, rules can be ignored, etc. So it's not about this harsh adherence to the Codex Astartes. It is about the spirit of the thing. And the spirit of the thing originally was, as Harmony is saying, and what you are saying now is the corporatized slop. Just to get a jab in. Can't be too nice. Is that fair enough analysis?
Well, I hate to respond to Richard when he's not here now. And I say this with only love in my heart for him because, like I said, he's one of my favorite people on Twitter. We banter all the time. But if we all agreed beforehand on a definition of war game, and then the definition has now changed to include it can't have role playing, then I don't really know what I'm doing here anymore because
well, on that point, Harmony, if you guys can look at the chat, Soy Pill recently has been trying out this new debate tactic. And Wick, can you bring this up? I believe this is a real tweet.
We're not doing that.
Yes, she. Hold on, no. This is this sort of what would we call it? Grievance archaeology here. She has said that she changed her mind in the last few years, and this is years ago.
Oh, this isn't real.
Right. So
is it not real?
But to be fair, Harmony, you
What are
did
we doing?
engage in deception. You told me Star Control 1 and 2 were free. I had to purchase them for $4.
No,
so
no,
that
no, no,
was-
no, no, no. You purchased Star Control 1. Star Control 2 is free, actually. If you look up on Steam, it is under the name Free Stars, the Urquan Masters. It is 100% free. Star Control 1 is a dogfighting simulator, and it is like, don't even play it. Play Star Control 2. And so I'm sorry about your $5.
True
You can
Control
still
Masters.
free. I think it's called Free Stars, the Urquan Masters is what it's called. Definitely buy that. It's free.
Okay.
It is the greatest space opera game ever. But anyway, I never said that I don't role play or that a war game can't include role playing, because it absolutely can. I believe that diplomacy is. I would definitely call diplomacy a war game that includes role playing. But I mean, I'm just. I don't want to. I guess I'm a little bit irked here because we all agreed to a definition of war game before, and now it's
I
being
never,
added, so.
I never agreed
Did
to
you
anything.
not?
Yeah,
Oh,
I-
okay. All right.
I-
all right.
that was
also-
Sorry, it was the
Well, I'm
definition
crazy.
that
I
in chat
never
was
slide
laid out
anything.
by. All right. Maybe we didn't all agree to it. Richard Whitters laid out the definition. I thought we were all good with that
Well,
one.
I
But all right.
go, but I guess in here, like the addition of a war game can't have role playing. Just I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's
I
true.
think that's just
Yeah.
wrong. I
No,
would
that-
disagree with that as a definition. I could think of
Yeah, no.
many war
tries
games.
it tries to define the argument in a too favorable a light for one
Yeah.
side.
It basically says my definition is anything that like especially if you were
Bro, that's
changing
what
your
you do with
definition.
D&D all the time. What are you talking about? Wick, that's what you do with D&D. You're saying that you have a
Yeah,
definition
but
of what
I
D&D
I
is.
said this definition and I haven't changed it mid debate.
All right,
That's
fair
the
enough.
difference.
Fair
Does
enough.
that make sense? You knew
Yes,
what
that
I
does
was
make
going
sense.
in. You knew what I thought it was going in. I have not changed this. It is the same. But we are getting kind of to the 2-hour mark. And I want to.
I stayed an hour over time.
Yeah,
Whoops.
I appreciate you doing so. I don't
got
know
too
where
into it.
Richard went. I
You're
hope
having
he's
fun.
Okay, I hope. I'm pretty sure his.
No,
cell
this
phone
is
probably
my
bad.
sort of thing.
But I want to give.
Aw,
Well,
kitty.
first of all, this has been all over the place. But I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank everyone for coming today. If you've enjoyed this show, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We got some great content coming up. Tomorrow's going to be a one-on-one debate between Admiral Gibbs and Ditso on political topics of all things. We're going to talk about South American, Latin America, interventionism with America and the cartels. It should be fun. Thursday's going to be a fun call-in show. If you have disagreements with me, you can call in. Yeah, I'm still not sure if I'm doing anything Friday. We'll find out. But here's the deal. I want everyone here to give a shout out to themselves. Where can people find you? And give your closing thoughts on the subject at hand. We're going to start with Soy Pill. We're going to end with Harmony Ginger. We're going to let her have the last word. Go ahead, Soy Pill. Give us what you got.
Yeah, I'm the Soy Pill. You can find me at the Soy Pill on YouTube. I make a lot of political video essays and I stream from time to time. Yeah, I heard a lot of good arguments on both of these sides. And not to be a flip-flopper, but I think I'm going to take a hard stance actually at the end here, which is yes, I've heard some very good things about this so-called first edition, if it does really exist. I understand that the player interactions can make it a lot better, but every single D&D campaign that I've ever played in Baldur's Gate 3, anything related, the best parts have been when I got to roleplay. And if I had to choose between one or the other, roleplaying is always going to be what I lean on the side of. I understand the purity argument that, hey, we're getting into the slop territory, but man, do I love being a doofy little funny little improvisational character. And at the very least, I can say I enjoyed the discussion. It was very nice to meet all of you, and I'd play in any of your D&D campaigns. I'm sure I'd have fun. So
Richard's phone did die. He just DM'd me. He did not rage quit. Okay. He didn't run away. He wasn't scared
He's
of
not
us.
the sort of
His
chap
phone
to
just
rage
died.
quit.
But no, thank you for being here, Soy Pill. Really appreciate you. Links to all these lovely individuals are in the YouTube description. You can please, they took time out of their day to be on my show. Click on their links. Give them a subscribe. Jack, please.
Well, yes, hello. I am Jack, the Lost Scholar, the chronicler of the Northlands. And Soy, when you finally get tired of being a doofy little improv character, you're more than welcome to come and try something a bit more edifying. I do this sort of thing, this sort of conversation, every Wednesday over on my channel, which I could link in the chat if Wick will allow me, to
I don't know if I actually have links allowed. You're gonna have to link that
it-
to me.
it
and I
worked.
will link it to the people.
Richard Witters
does
is
that.
back.
So yes, I do this sort of conversation every Wednesday. In fact, Richard Witters joins me very often on stream. Whether he will be here on my stream tomorrow night or not, I don't know. Where we'll be talking about dragons, because dragons are bloody cool. And eventually, I will snag Harmony Ginger to come on and actually
I've
just
been
talk
on.
some TTRPG games.
I've
Not
been
on
your
Tittle.
channel.
You've
Oh,
not been on
okay.
Tittle yet.
Okay.
The show's called Tittle. Then yes, that is
It's a problematic name, but okay. All right.
It's talking in the
Tittle.
library.
Okay.
It's Tittle.
Okay, but thank you, Jack, for being here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for
Happy birthday.
spending your time and happy. Well,
Thank you.
it was
Well,
no
not as
your
of
birthday,
about an hour ago.
but
Oh, well.
happy belated birthday. Thank you for being here. Richard is back with us, thankfully. We thought you we thought you got mad at us or something, but we're glad to see you.
I'm sorry about that. I know you like streams when people get mad and drop out.
That's what I like, of course. It's exactly right. No,
Appreciate the drama.
Yeah, Richard, please tell people where they can find you and give closing thoughts. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Oh, okay. I'll go on. Well, tomorrow night you can see me on Jack's show.
Oh, you're coming on then. Sweet.
I'll come on.
Yeah, you need to pick a dragon. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll chat there. Closing stuff, I guess. Like I said, I think war games existed before D&D and tabletop. Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax created something new. And that element they added to those mechanics, a lot of them that came from war games, was like the role-playing side and stuff like that. So I think to kind of say, that wasn't anything real different. It's just a war game with this. To me, is a little bit that doesn't fit in my head of how I see it. So I would say instead, there, from what Harmony was talking about, which I completely agree with, there are certain wargaming mechanics and mechanics used in the early game that I do think can make the game a lot more fun. If you can look at what she does, you'll probably have more fun.
Okay. Well, thanks for being here, Richard. I really appreciate you. Even though you're wrong, but it's okay. It's okay to be wrong. We're allowing it. No, thank you for being here. In Pursuit of Knowledge, what do you got?
Wick, thank you for having me on. I know this started off as like a little, side comment and got to dig deep, and I really appreciate everybody here. Richard, I love your Filigree Angel art. I have a foil
thanks.
copy. I'm going to have to get it signed by you at some point. Maybe you'd be at Gen Con. I don't know. I'll look you up or something.
Get me on Twitter and mail it to me.
Okay.
I'll sign it for you. Yep.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much for having me, John. You're a cool guy. Soy Pill, thanks for the meme, and Harmony. I would love to be in your war game. You can play D&D with us sometime as a role-playing game. You can find me on the Twitters and the Blue Sky in Pursuit of Knowledge. Yeah, thanks.
No, thanks for being here. Check him out. Links in my YouTube description. I really appreciate you. Last but certainly not least, Harmony Ginger.
Wait, did Soy Pill already go?
Huh?
Oh, dude, I just
yeah, I
blocked
went
him
first.
out. I'm so sorry. All
yeah.
right. Yeah,
We all
I'm,
try to do that.
I'm Harmony Ginger. Ginger Blast on Twitter, Harmony_Ginger on YouTube, and Harmony Ginger on Substack. I do think that there is a game that has been lost to time that is described in the AD&D PHB, and I think it is worth looking into. I think it is worth checking out because you can change your game and bring in those wargaming elements in order to create a completely player-driven world and story. And I promise it is nothing like most games are now, and it's worth pursuing for certain.
Well, thank you for being here, and credit to Harmony for asking and requesting this topic. I was glad to host it. I'm going to let all these little people escape if they want to. I'm still going to rant a little bit. If you want to stay, you can. If you don't, I don't care. But I'm going to move you guys out, and if you want to stay, just DM me, and I'll bring you back in. But have a great night, and thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bloop, 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 bloop. Okay, gang. Okay. This is a problem. Here's the deal. And this is the problem with panels sometimes, especially when I have a very strong opinion. I want to talk a lot because I have a very strong opinion. And I think that the core argument gets lost a little bit in the back and forth, and everyone wants to get their point in, and everyone wants to go in, and I get that. I understand it. It's fun. It's good content. But I'm trying to say this because it's important. To me, it's important, okay? When you have bread, just because you slice it and create something new, it is not no longer bread. When you have toast, whoever decided to put some cinnamon and some butter on toast was a genius, okay? They revolutionized toast, but it's still toast at the end of the day. It's still toast. It's just toast with yummy things that entirely change the experience, but it's still toast. At the end of the day, it's still that category. When we talk about war games, okay, Dungeons and Dragons is the cinnamon toast of war games, to use the analogy. It has the base and shares that base of rules to resolve conflict with the war games of the past, and then has the addition of the role-playing on it that makes it unique, that makes it its own thing. Now again, you can have variations on a theme here. There is nothing wrong with that. You can bring in a cinnamon roll, but that cinnamon roll, you might like the cinnamon roll better, but it's not toast any longer. You're no longer using the same ingredients. There is a point at which a game which has role-playing and rolls dice is no longer Dungeons and Dragons. There is a point where that occurs. And I would argue, I would posit, that modern Dungeons and Dragons is no longer Dungeons and Dragons. It is wearing the skin of the old game, but has none of the same organs. It is a skinwalker. It is a skinwalker posing as Dungeons and Dragons, but it is not. The organs do not work the same. If you cut it open, you no longer have intestines and a heart and lungs that all mesh together. It's this glop, this soup that is something categorically different. That, my friends, my dear, dear viewers, is why I think it's important. Because it's okay to want to play a modern role-playing game. They're fun. They're fine. I play 13th Age. I love it. It's great. I think it's a good amalgamation of Dungeons and Dragons, as well as cooperative storytelling and some other elements. But it's not Dungeons and Dragons. It's 13th Age. It's its own thing. Call of Cthulhu. Love that game, right? But it's not Dungeons and Dragons. It's a different experience. It is designed to be a different experience. And it would be a mistake to call Call of Cthulhu Dungeons and Dragons, because it is simply not it. Words matter. Words have meanings. Titles have meanings. Games, right, aren't all just, it's all video games. It's not. There are distinct categories of video games. Pong is not Hearts of Iron 4, which is not Halo. They are very different. They may use the same base, but they are very different because they have different rule sets, and you interact with them in a much different ways. The player experience is much different in these things. So when you have Dungeons and Dragons, okay, and you change the way that players interact with it and the way that the mechanics work to resolve conflict to a certain degree, it ceases to be Dungeons and Dragons. The load-bearing rules, the load-bearing concepts of Dungeons and Dragons are conflict on a grand scale that is also applicable to a small scale, but both of these have to come together. You have the story of your character that grows into a world power that then has conflict with the other world powers. And the game is best played when the player has the ability to shape the world in a way that is unique and has a major impact on the story. And the mechanics that best facilitate that are found in one-to-one time, Bronstein-style play, etc. And again, I make no apologies for it. If you're offended that, oh, you're saying your game is better? Yes. As a Dungeons & Dragons game, it is simply better. Absolutely. You can play another game, and it might be you might enjoy it more. I'll give you an example. I enjoy Forgotten Realms books. I enjoy them. I think they're fun. They're fun to read. I enjoy them a lot. But they are not at the same level as a classic such as Ulysses or War and Peace or all these other types of very serious literature. I don't enjoy War and Peace as much as I enjoy Forgotten Realms. I like Forgotten Realms better, right? I like it more. But I would never say it's a better book than War and Peace. It's just not. It's more consumable, it's more enjoyable, but it's not better. Does that make sense? Do we get it? Hope so. I hope so. Okay? We good? We set? I got to rant. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any opinions? Tessie Johnson says D&D sucks. Well, you suck, sir. Okay. Black Sam Bell says D&D is a sword and sorcery adventure game that includes elements of a war game. Dwarven Beardcraft says it's not that serious. I take my game seriously. It's not world ending, right? But I do take my game seriously. If I run a game or if I participate in a game, I invest my time, my energy, and my resources into that game, and I take it seriously when I do those things, right? It's, again, I'm not going to, like, cry over a game, right? But it is something that... The reason this is important, and let me tell you why, is I look at what has become of Dungeons & Dragons, what a lot of people now think of as Dungeons & Dragons, and I do not recognize the thing that I enjoyed when I was younger. I no longer recognize the interesting interactions and the ways of play that I was very much enjoying. So while it may appear, look, it may now simply appeal to a wider audience, but I don't care because it no longer appeals to me. It has, in many ways, modern Dungeons & Dragons has died for me because I no longer pay it. I no longer have any interest in playing it. And I don't care if it sells 1 billion copies. It's no longer something I want to engage with. It's no longer something I find engaging. It's no longer something I find fun. And in a very real way, it no longer exists for me. It's no longer being iterated upon. It is changed into something that I no longer recognize. And if I want to continue to expound upon and iterate on a specific base, which I do, I'm not against change, by the way, right? I think that there could be interesting additions, interesting variations on old school Dungeons & Dragons that are still Dungeons & Dragons, but play out in different ways, and you can have different experiences, right? That's fine, but they have, again, in the interest of appealing to a mass audience, taken out some of the things that I feel are integral to what I consider the Dungeons & Dragons experience, to the extent that, unfortunately, In Pursuit of Knowledge is correct. If you ask most people on the street what is Dungeons & Dragons, they would get the answer wrong. They would think, oh, is that like Critical Role? Oh, is that like 5th edition? Oh, I remember 3rd edition and 3.5 edition. These things aren't actually Dungeons and Dragons. They're a different game, and you might like that game more. That's fair. But it's not Dungeons and Dragons. Okay? J-Max says, no, I missed it live, but you're here. We're live. No, we're live right now, right? Everyone just had to go because it's 8 hours. Now I'm ranting. J-Mac, what do you think? Is Dungeons and Dragons a war game? Yeah, what they took out is a whole nother stream, buddy. Right? Like, it's they're if, like I said, it's like wearing a skin suit. It's like wearing a skin suit. It's this uncanny valley where you recognize the aesthetics of it, but the bones are different. And it's, what you're looking at is no longer that, but it bears some weird, uncanny resemblance to it. It uses all the same words, but it is no longer that thing. It's like if you have a friend and it's a dear friend and you don't see them for 20 years, okay? And then you meet your friend again, okay? They have the same name. They're the same, they look older, right? But you could recognize the same person. But their experiences within that 20 years have changed fundamentally who they are and your relationship with them. And that's what I feel has happened with Dungeons and Dragons for me. It has become something that I no longer recognize, and I no longer really, I just don't like it. It's just not fun. I don't play 5th edition. I enjoyed 4th edition, right? I enjoyed 4th edition. It was different from Dungeons and Dragons, but it was close in the ways that I felt mattered. And so I much preferred it to 3.5, and I much preferred it to 5th edition. And if I was going to play modern Dungeons and Dragons, I would play 4th edition over 3.5 and over 5th. Absolutely. Because it got to the conflict part. It got to what made Dungeons and Dragons a war game, right? Closer than 5th edition does and 3.5 does. Yeah. But okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to say? So J-Max says, no, I think it's better as a story-driven game with systems that accommodate for combat. But here's the deal. The combat drives the story. So here's a problem with story gaming. And I'll just tell you why this is an issue, and what disincentivized to happen, and what usually happens when you say, D&D is a story game, and we're going to tell a story. You get invested in, this is a story I want to tell, and it, by its very nature, morphs the game to fit that mold of the story the Dungeon Master wants to tell in a way that precludes the players from meaningfully altering it. Now, again, people can try not to railroad, try to make it more open worldy and things like that. But the fact that the DM has a story that they want to tell suddenly limits your game. It limits it when you let the mechanics tell the story. And what I mean by that is you play the game, you roll the dice, you resolve the conflict, and then you tell the story of what just happened. It allows for the player's input and the player's skill at the game to drive the story in a way that is fundamentally different and fundamentally better and fundamentally more interesting than story games. And story games have their place. They can be fun, but it's not the same game. It's not. Again, War games are the cake. The role-playing is the icing. A cake is not the icing. And it would be a mistake. It would be a mistake to misidentify the role-playing as the thing. No, it's a war game with icing. And it's delicious, and it never had icing before, right? Gary Gygax and all them are the ones to add the icing and thought, what if we put sugary, yummy, buttery icing on this? And everyone was like, oh, that's genius! But it's still cake. Cool. Cool. Okay, we're going right out. Who's live? I hope you guys had fun. I always enjoy these, okay? And I needed them. Let's raid into this. Let's go to Nina. Okay, and I want you guys to tell Nina that this is a hate raid. Okay, I love you guys. I'll see you tomorrow for some politics, because I know you guys don't like the Dungeons and Dragons. You want the politics, so we'll do some politics tomorrow. I love you guys. Stay safe.